The greatest comebacks in boxing history are amongst the most inspiring and exciting things you can see in sport. And the reason is because we can relate to it on a deep-rooted level. Boxing is so often referred to as a metaphor for life. Getting knocked down, taking shots, rising up and coming back stronger. It's one of the main reasons the Rocky underdog stories are so popular, and why boxing at its very best is one of the most exciting and dramatic sports in the world. So I wanted to get straight into it and go through some of the most incredible comebacks ever produced in boxing history. I'm going to start off with a modern comeback. At number 20, I'm going with John Molina Jr. versus Mickey Bay. Now, this wasn't one of the biggest fights of its time. However, the comeback was phenomenal. Going into round 10, Molina Jr., who was brought in as an opponent for the undefeated Mickey Bay. He was down on the cards heading into the 10th round.
Bay way ahead, 89-82 on points going into the 10th round. Molina needs a 9-run home run. And it doesn't look like he's going to get it.
When ultimately he clipped Bay with a left hook and pounced, securing the finish. Now with time this would resonate even better as Bay would become the lightweight champion of the world, and Molina Jr. would have an absolutely savage fight of the year against Lucas Matisse, whilst also fighting the likes of Adrian Broner, Terence Crawford, Omar Figueroa and many others, defeating Ruslan Provodnikov too. At number 19 is Arturo Gati's win over Wilson Rodriguez. On his way to superstardom, Gatti was forced to overcome severe adversity against Rodriguez, having a seriously swollen eye early on and being dropped in the second round. With the brawling style he would become so famous for, Gatti bravely fought back, but was hurt multiple times. The brutality of Rodriguez's shots were on full display for fans as he unloaded clean, ferocious combinations right on Gatti's chin in front of the camera. Gatti would show the height he became so revered for the rest of his career, soaking up an absolute hailstorm of punishment over 6 rounds before finding a beautiful left hook to the body, which he followed up with a knockout left hook to the head in round 6. And number 18 is a huge upset too. Andy Ruiz defeating Anthony Joshua to become the first ever Mexican heavyweight champion. After Jarrell Miller tested positive for steroids, Ruiz was brought in on late notice as a replacement. Due to the late notice and his unassuming physique, many fans thought this would be an easy Joshua victory, and after 3 rounds, it looked that way. But Ruiz came back swinging after catching a heavy right hand on the chin and caught Joshua on the temple, dropping him twice in the 3rd round. The pair would continue to land big shots across the duration of the fight, but ultimately it was Ruiz that took over the course of the action. And as the fight headed into the 7th round, Ruiz let go a huge blistering combination that hurt Joshua and put him down for the 3rd time. After rising from the canvas, Joshua overreached and got caught again, going down for the 4th and final time as the referee waved the fight off. And Ruiz jumped for joy as he achieved history. At number 17 is Jorge Castro's remarkable comeback against John David Jackson. The undefeated Jackson was a slick southpaw, completely dominating the Argentine veteran.
Now it looks like Jackson's almost having fun. He's got the heavy bag in front of him and he's popping it everywhere he wants. And you got to think about stopping a fight like this. It's a one-way route going on here.
After 9 rounds, the commentators were calling the fight to be stopped. And as Jackson landed a devastating left hand, Castro backed up, extremely hurt. But the Argentinian amassed a career total of 90 knockouts, and with a punch like that, he could never be counted out, as he landed the sweetest left hook of his career to put Jackson on the floor. As Jackson rose to his feet, he was instantly dropped again and seemingly out of it. Having been up so heavily on the cards and seconds away from a stoppage, the referee gave him one last chance, but Castro regained his middleweight title, landing a sweet right uppercut. And whilst on the subject of hard punchers, let's talk about the fight between Edwin Rosario and Jose Luis Ramirez, 2 of the hardest punchers ever in the Mexico-Puerto Rico rivalry. Similarly to Castro, the southpaw Mexican Ramirez had over 80 career knockouts, and whilst the dynamite punching Rosario battered him around the ring, dropping him twice, the power in the Mexican's fists couldn't be underestimated. However, with Rosario already winning a unanimous decision over Luis Ramirez, and the fact that he had not only put him down multiple times but kept hurting him, suggested that the rematch was going to go exactly the same way as the first. But whilst the pair slugged away, the wounded Ramirez held strong and landed a sickening body shot to the stomach of Rosario. Having sensed he'd hurt his opponent, he instantly jumped on him, unleashing barrages of southpaw shots. Once Ramirez had his man hurt, he didn't let up at all, and Rosario, completely out on his feet and overwhelmed by the combinations, completely turned his back, losing both his perfect undefeated record and the WBC lightweight title. Number 15 is a fight on a lower level than the world title fights here, but the courage in this one is just on another level. Danny Williams, who actually holds a victory against an aging Mike Tyson, is facing off against the powerful Mark Potter. In a bid to win the vacant British heavyweight title, Williams had his right shoulder dislocated multiple times. An injury both debilitating and extremely painful. But not only this, it meant he was only able to fend Potter off with his left arm. As Potter sensed weakness in Williams, he closed in for the finish, landing tons of shots, with the commentators stating there was no way Williams was ever going to get through this one. But out of nowhere, under severe adversity, he found a perfect left uppercut that an overeager Potter just never saw coming. The shot had done enough damage to throw Potter off completely, and with just his left arm, Williams sealed the deal in round 6, winning the British heavyweight title. Number 14 is the first body shot finish of this list, and it involves the second member of the legendary Gatti Ward fights, Mickey Ward. This was a real crossroads fight for Ward against the hard-punching Alfonso Sanchez. Ward had bounced back from 4 defeats in a row years earlier, and having gone into this one as a stepping stone for Sanchez, desperately needed a win to revitalise his career. But for 7 rounds, he took a brutal beating, losing every minute of every round. So much so that even the HBO commentators that would come to love Ward were criticising him harshly.
If anything interesting happens, we'll let you know.
If I were paying for this fight on pay-per-view, I'd be wanting half of my money back. Someone should pay me to watch this. That was a good body shot by Ward.
That was a good body shot by Ward. Maybe it'll turn him around.
Maybe. I'm talking about if I were... oh, see? That's all it took.
Unbelievable. You are looking at the most unlikely knockout.
The victory springboarded Ward into the best phase of his career, setting up future fights against Arturo Gati, Emmanuel Augustus, Zab Judah and Shane Neary. At number 13 are 2 power-punching middleweights from the 2000s. Jermaine Taylor had a phenomenal undefeated record with 2 wins over Bernard Hopkins, a draw against Winky Wright and another win against William Joppy. Having won the undisputed middleweight titles from Bernard Hopkins, ending his 10-year reign, he looks set to stop Youngstown, Ohio's native Kelly Pavlik in the second round. Pavlik was dropped heavily and all over the place, taking full-blooded shots from the power-punching Taylor, but stayed strong and was able to find his way back into the fight. Having recovered and being able to take Taylor's shots better, he started firing his own shots back towards the mid-rounds, pushing Taylor backwards. Pavlik capitalised on the momentum he picked up in round 6, having backed Taylor against the ropes and started to unleash his combinations, before finally taking it to another level in round 7 after landing multiple right hands which clearly staggered Taylor. As Taylor backed up into the corner, Pavlik clinically pounced and beat up on Taylor, who was completely defenceless, taking full-blooded shots and slumped into the corner. Moving on to number 12, where former Irish amateur superstar Michael Conlan took on Lee Wood for the WBA featherweight title. Conlan looked set to win his first world title with an early finish, as the talented switch hitter battered Wood with a left hand that he just never worked out. Wood's ability to climb off the canvas and get back into this fight was just sheer toughness and stubborn determination, because throughout the duration of the fight he was still taking those full-blooded shots in an absolute war. But having dropped Wood, Conlan had also built up a lead on the scorecards when the rugged Nottingham fighter just outright refused to back off. This one was an absolute war of attrition, and both men took incredible damage across 12 furious non-stop rounds. But it was Conlan who was looking the more tired of the two as the fight wore on, and Wood was able to score a knockdown against his tired opponent. Heading into the final round, Conlan just needed to stay on his feet to win the title, but Wood's determination ultimately saw him seal one of the most dramatic finishes of the decade. At number 11 is Nottingham's Carl Froch taking on Jermaine Taylor. Froch was defending his world title for the first time, making his US debut against Jermaine Taylor, who similarly in the case of his fight against Kelly Pavlik, started extremely strong, putting Froch on the floor in round 3 whilst building a lead on the scorecards heading into the 12th round. Froch needed at least multiple knockdowns or a knockout to seal the victory. With just under 2 minutes left to go in the fight, Froch nailed Taylor with a right hand, and as the American backed up against one of the most relentless fighters of his era, history was doomed to repeat itself. But Taylor had a stubborn defiance and refused to go down for over a minute of barrages from Froch. But Froch never backed off, and with 50 seconds left in the round, finally secured the knockdown. Exhausted and on the brink of defeat, Taylor still could have won the fight had he have stayed on his feet, so Froch pounced with 20 seconds left to go, where ultimately the ref waved the fight off. Going into the top 10 is one of the biggest sliding doors moments in boxing history, as former light heavyweight champion Billy Conn moved up in an attempt to dethrone the unbeatable Joe Louis for the heavyweight title. Against all odds, the Pittsburgh Kid nearly pulled off the impossible victory, landing blistering flurries against his much larger champion. Louis proved his own greatness, firing back with combinations of his own, but Conn, filled with an unbreakable determination, found a way to respond and built a lead on the scorecards going into 13 rounds. Deep into the championship rounds, all Conn had to do was just stay on his feet and continue to box, to dethrone boxing's most dominant ever champion. However, having hurt Louis multiple times, he instead opted to try and get the finish. Tactics that would end in a disastrous manner for Conn against boxing's most brutal ever finisher. Once Louis started to find his target, the ending was all but set in stone, as he began to really hurt Conn with every punch he threw. And with the legendary killer instinct he became so famous for, the Brown Bomber ultimately turned the tide in round 13. Regaining his heavyweight title, he would hold for the rest of the decade, while scuppering any dreams Conn had of pulling off the upset. At number 9 is one of the key victories that immortalised Rocky Marciano as the only ever heavyweight champion to retire with a perfect undefeated record. Rocky had compiled a perfect 42-0 record when he eventually challenged Jersey Joe Walcott for the title, and Walcott, albeit being the oldest heavyweight champion ever at the time at 37, having decisively knocked out one of the greatest fighters of all time in Ezard Charles for the title. Against Marciano, Walcott pulled off all of his slippery defensive tricks to build a lead on the scorecards. An early knockdown over the unbeaten challenger all but punctuated his lead on the cards. In typical fashion, Rocky maintained his unrelenting style, constantly pressuring Walcott, but the veteran's defensive tricks were proving a tricky guard for Marciano to crack, and Walcott was landing heavy shots of his own. But in round 13, Rocky's persistence finally paid off, where from his famous crouch stance, he let out a jab to set up the right hand that would catch the champion clean as he went to throw his own shot. The punch that ignited one of the most iconic reigns in heavyweight championship history. At number 8 is one of the toughest fighters in boxing history, Carmen Basilio, who was involved in the fight of the year 5 years in a row, a statistic that will never be broken. And in 1955, Basilio partook in the first of those 5 fights against Tony DeMarco for the welterweight title. DeMarco would unleash one of the most savage beatings ever recorded on film, landing almost every punch he threw cleanly, visually staggering boxing's ultimate tough man and sending him all over the ring. Basilio, true to form, stuck in there for 12 brutal rounds, always willing to fight back whilst taking full-blooded punches over and over again. Eventually, DeMarco would succumb to both exhaustion and the will of the unbreakable Basilio as the champion turned the tide to seal a 12th round TKO, the same result as their first fight. This victory was followed up with a Fight of the Year victory against Johnny Saxton a year later and a move up to middleweight to defeat Sugar Ray Robinson for the middleweight title. Basilio's 2 fights against Robinson were simultaneous Fight of the Year winners, followed up by a fellow Fight of the Year winner against the formidable brawler Gene Fullmer. At number 7 is one of the most unlikely victories ever seen in boxing history. George Foreman winning the heavyweight title at the age of 46 against the remarkably skillful southpaw Michael Moorer, who became the first ever southpaw heavyweight champion. Foreman, wearing the same trunks as he had worn in the Rumble in the Jungle 2 decades earlier against Muhammad Ali, was consistently outclassed and outpointed by his younger, slicker opponent. But with his teak toughness and his persistent plodding style that he fought with in his second coming, Foreman's power, having scored 68 career knockouts, always maintained a level of threat. Moorer's trainer Teddy Atlas stated multiple times how Foreman was setting Moorer up for the right hand, and Foreman continued to land a shot with more regularity as the fight wore on, setting it up with a jab. Eventually, the now iconic 1-2 would completely turn the fight in a split second, stamping Foreman as one of boxing's true immortals. At number 6 is the Raging Bull Jake Lamata against Laurent Dortil. Lamata was making the second defence of his middleweight world title he had won against the legendary Marcel Cerdan. The fight was heading into his final round with Dortil heavily up on the scorecards. Lamata, needing a knockout to win, looked all but exhausted, even slouching against the ropes against his opponent. But suddenly, his tactics made sense, as after playing possum, he let go furious combination punches that completely caught the would-be champion off guard. Lamata found a new burst of energy, landing shot after shot against this evasive challenger. Ultimately, when Dortil fought back, Lamata taunted him, unleashing vicious punches with an intensity that was lacking throughout the fight. And once it began, Lamata never let Dortil off the hook, and the challenger simply couldn't deal with the barrages that were coming his way, finally sealing a 15th round TKO with a leaping left hook. At number 5 is one of the greatest fights of all time, Sugar Ray Leonard versus Tommy Hearns 1. A fight for the welterweight world title that is truly a tale of two halves. The power punching Hearns was in control of a large portion of the fight in the first half, being an ever-present menace, hurting Leonard with long straight shots. Leonard knew he wasn't going to win this one whilst boxing on the back foot, and having taken the power, ultimately went from hunted to hunter and started walking Hearns down in the second portion of the fight. Spirited on by the legendary Angelo Dundee in the corner, who so famously stated in the corner, "You're blowing it, son." And finally, in round 13, Leonard found the shot which staggered Hearns, as Sugar Ray followed up with vicious intent and remarkable resources of energy, stealing the contest with the most explosive combination punches ever seen in the championship rounds of a fight. At number 4 is Mike Weaver's comeback against Big John Tate for the heavyweight championship of the world. In a true real-life Rocky fight, Mike Weaver, who going into the contest had a record of 21 wins to 9 defeats, was taking on the undefeated heavyweight champion, Knoxville native John Tate in his hometown. And the athletic, newly crowned heavyweight champion was touted to do big things in the heavyweight division. Tate took command in the first defence of his heavyweight title, building a colossal lead against the muscle-bound Weaver heading into the 15th and final round. Weaver, who at this point needed a miracle to win, eventually found success later on after landing a left hook and following up, but Tate survived the initial onslaught. As the bell rang for round 15, a Weaver victory looked all but impossible until he landed one of the greatest left hooks ever seen that completely flattened the champion. Weaver improved his record to 22-9 with one of the most miraculous comebacks ever seen to become the heavyweight champion of the world against the undefeated champion. A true Rocky story. At number 3 is once again one of the greatest fights of all time, Corrales versus Castillo. For 9 rounds, these two were absolutely brawling with one another on the inside until the famous round 10. Having feinted to the body, Castillo landed one of the most perfect left hooks you could ever wish to see, putting Corrales on the floor. Corrales, obviously hurt by the shot, craftily spat his mouthpiece out to buy himself some time. But it wasn't enough, as another left hook round the guard sent him staggering once more, and Castillo followed up to knock him down a second time. Corrales once again spat the mouthpiece out, but this time he wouldn't go unpunished, and would inevitably be deducted a point. Round 10 had been disastrous for Corrales, who had lost an extra 3 points due to the 2 knockdowns and the point deduction due to spitting his mouthpiece out, ultimately sealing his loss on the cards. His predicament was fairly simple, as summed up so perfectly by Joe Goosen. Castillo, whose confidence had soared, sensed the finish, but being overeager, a common theme in these comebacks, walked onto a left hook from the hurt Corrales. And in the most dramatic one-round turnaround ever seen in the sport, the dynamic had instantly shifted, as Castillo was now the one who found himself on the back foot, just seconds after dropping Corrales for the second time. Desperately seizing to maintain the momentum he had found, Corrales just threw non-stop punches, taking some back. Yet every time Castillo threw, he found himself taking clean left hooks now and visibly wobbled backwards against the ropes. Corrales threw combinations that violently jerked the head of a defenseless Castillo round to pull off the comeback victory. And number 2 is Julio Cesar Chavez against Jermaine Taylor. a true super fight that lived up to the dramatic hype. Chavez had already been one of the most dominant champions ever seen, having a record of 68-0 when he faced off against the former Olympic medalist and the fast-handed world champion. Taylor, himself undefeated to this point, was putting on a career-best performance, dazzling the front-footed Mexican with his skills and speed. Chavez continuously struggled to find answers across the first two-thirds of this fight. Everything he threw was either being matched by or surpassed by Taylor's fast hands. As the rounds passed on, Taylor looked more and more set to dethrone Chavez and end his incredibly long unbeaten streak. But the champion stayed in there, and his bodywork and pressure ultimately began to pay dividends towards the end of the fight. Taylor had put so much into building that lead on the cards that the work that Chavez had consistently maintained eventually started getting to him. As the fight drew to its conclusion, Taylor was visibly exhausted and the shots were doing damage. Until finally, in the 12th and final round, Chavez scored the knockdown with the right hand. With less than 20 seconds to go in the fight, Taylor, unresponsive to referee Richard Steele, was deemed unable to continue and the fight was waved off with just 2 seconds to go, completely extinguishing the lead he had on the cards. Chavez would go unbeaten across his next 31 professional contests. And at number 1, the greatest comeback in boxing history is Archie Moore's comeback against Yvonne Durrell. Archie Moore was well into his 40s by the time of this fight, with some reports suggesting he may have even been older. He had won the light heavyweight world title that he was defending in this bout 5 years earlier, and over a decade past what you would seemingly consider to be his physical prime, and took on the thunderous punching, far younger and far stronger Yvonne Durrell defending his title. Durrell had gone out and blasted Archie Moore 3 times on the canvas in the first round, and whilst the old mongoose used all of his experience and toughness to get through, he was very nearly the victim of a first round knockout. However, he found his feet in round 2, but ultimately continued to take heavy shots across the 3rd and the 4th before being dropped a 4th time in round 5. Having been dropped 4 times in just under 15 minutes and taken shots that most fighters would have been knocked out by, Moore hung in there and found his feet across 11 rounds. What makes this durability and toughness at the top level even more incredible, considering his advanced age, was that this fight was his 206th professional contest, 15 years after he'd battled the likes of Ezra Charles and Charlie Burley in their primes. Moore threw back with the power that had accumulated 132 career knockouts, much to the astonishment of his opponent, who couldn't quite believe the man was still standing. And then his sharp skills, legendary punch placement and power sealed his first knockdown in return. The exhausted Durrell tasted the canvas multiple times off the back of Moore's onslaught, until the fight was finally waved off in round 11. Archie Moore would hold on to the light heavyweight world titles for another 4 years, eventually holding a 10-year reign as champion, the longest ever seen at light heavyweight. His second to last fight was against the young Muhammad Ali.